This week on the Around the Coin podcast, we have Brian Roemmele, Faisal Khan, and Mike Townsend discussing loyalty applications like Belly, Level Up, as well as what technical strategy will win across various regions of the world. Around the Coin podcast.
So today, we'll be talking largely about loyalty. Within the topic of loyalty, we have three particular focuses that I think we'll drill into. One would be, what does it take for a loyalty program to be successfully with a focus on international? And this is going to take into account different cultures and distribution channels and technology infrastructure. The second is, what would a successful distribution strategy look like across the U.S.? And you have different relationships, resellers, direct sales you can utilize, but be interesting to hear all of our perspectives on what we think would be a successful distribution strategy. And then the third will be the technical strategy. I think different companies will take a different approach to solving the problem technically, and I think some technical strategies are going to have certain advantages, and it would be interesting to kind of dive into each of those. And with any time left, we'll certainly cover Bitcoin and all the news there. So how I think we would start this is each of us kind of go around and give our own interpretation of what loyalty is. I think it's such a widely used word that it often entails some confusion. I look at loyalty as the thing or product a company can offer its potential consumers and customers, existing customers, that really build a connection with the brand. Now that could be mobile, it could be technology, or it could be as simple as a punch card. But it's something that person feels something stronger than a quantitative connection, right? They feel some sort of emotional connection to return back. And you could certainly use quantitative methods, right? Come 9 times, get 1 free. But I think there's more to it than that. And I think you have to build on top of other infrastructure. You have to build on top of maybe payments as one of those, and you have to build on top of social components that would go into it. But I think largely it's going to be what brands can offer their potential consumers to increase the likelihood of them coming back through building an emotional connection.
I love it. I think it's a great start.
Okay, so Brian, your definition of loyalty.
Well, that's always going to be a moving target as we move forward, but let's move backwards one step here. Loyalty, in my view, got its really big kickstart in the turn of the century, but really the 1930s, and a product called S&H green stamps. And I always encourage anybody that's even slightly tangentially interested in this subject to study S&H green stamps. I was such a fanatic of what they did that I actually purchased through essentially a bankruptcy a lot of their unpublished internal studies. It's one of my things that I collect is corporate research that literally just goes away when the company goes away. Unfortunately, I have thousands of volumes when you really kind of put it all together. They did thousands of studies on why loyalty works in their definition at that time. Now, how successful was it? At one time in the United States, S&H green stamps printed more than the U.S. telephone directory did. That's how much printing that they were just slightly under newspapers and the amount of paper that they were using. How deep in the population? It was estimated at one time almost to the 78th percentile of U.S. citizens that were adults were somewhat involved with collecting and utilizing S&H green stamps. It was so viral that it started essentially with grocery stores as a way to reward somebody to come to that store. But it was available everywhere. It was ubiquitous. This started the premise of the credit card loyalty program. And so there are 2 forking definitions that I have for loyalty. One is isolated within the ecosystem and walled garden of a merchant, and then available on the greater, merchant category. And credit cards Payment cards are the definition of that today. So how do you affect loyalty when the credit card is giving you points? I don't know if that ever translates down to a single merchant unless there's a merchant relationship specifically with the payment card network that gives, enhanced points. And some of the airline cards are, close to that. And, American Express is known to do that with travel and entertainment categories, restaurants. Loyalty in the sense of the walled garden within a merchant is its own complexity, because why are we rewarding somebody who would otherwise be a loyal customer? And I do the thought experiment with a lot of my colleagues that are being pulled into this concept. I said, what's your favorite? In Southern California, it's pretty easy. In-N-Out Burger is a really favorite place for people to go for fast food. It's relatively inexpensive, relatively high quality. And I'm no longer a regular patron because I've moved dietarily into another category. But In-N-Out has never produced a coupon and has never had a loyalty program. Yet they compete with national chains. They compete with all sorts of food options. And it boils down to the fact that the product and a service is the loyalty system in and of itself. Now, obviously, that's not really covering the subject, but we got to keep that in mind, that really great products have their own loyalty built into them because the service and the product itself is feeding that loyalty reward system, if you will. Now, does that mean that loyalty points don't work and loyalty programs don't work? That's quite the contrary. Done the right way, executed the right way, and understanding the psychology the right way, these systems have phenomenal result. Remedial, I would tell anybody to read the works of Paco Underhill, Why We Buy. It's not specific to loyalty programs, but it's specific to the psychology that makes us become loyal to products, fall in love with products, and his research is scientific and it's phenomenal. So that's my definition is you're rewarding somebody initially, hopefully. I think one of the things that loyalty programs hope to do is to kickstart somebody into trying a product or trying a service. In that early phase or 3-phase relationships in all retail environments, in that early first phase, you're sort of developing a relationship. So loyalty in some regard is indistinguishable from relationships. It is a relationship that's really the underpinnings behind this. So that's the primary purpose of loyalty. I think in first phase, second and third phase, it gets more complex. But let's just say, in my view, the simple definition is loyalty is a way to build a communication dialogue and a relationship. And that relationship has a reward component that translates into something. Hopefully, it's more great products and services from that company. I am a disbeliever and do not support loyalty that converts into, again, in a walled garden sense, not in a credit card sense, that builds into dollars or points that can be used outside of that merchant's ecosystem, because I believe that's contrary to what a loyalty program should do.
Mm-hmm.
So
mm-hmm.
That's
great
definition there.
It's very interesting that you don't subscribe to the points ecosystem, because on the contrary, I actually subscribe to that thing. Loyalty for me is, I guess takes its roots from American Express, where all the managers used to actually carry the title manager loyalty and retention. And that pretty much gives a very good definition of what they're supposed to do. And loyalty in my books is, repeat business, retention, customer satisfaction. And with the current, sign of times that we have, it's, if I have the ultimate loyalty system for me is a coffee shop in India or a coffee shop in Pakistan or in Manila being able to trade their points via some exchange system with the points with Starbucks and vice versa. Because right now, all the loyalty systems are so siloed, they're so disenfranchised from each other that you have to essentially settle down on a particular coffee place, a particular airline, a hotel, and so forth. And the ability to trade points between them is very restricted, if you will. And it's even more so restricted when you're international. So for me, a loyalty system is one that that connects all, allows me to take my credit points from one merchant to the other. It has become a tradable commodity in many ways, and that's the way I look at it. Repeat business, retention, and the ability for an ecosystem to exist where I can exchange points.
Well, Faisal, I want to back up for a sec. The meta loyalty, I call them meta loyalty systems that you find on a credit card or something of that nature, American Express Air Miles or American Express points, if you will. I'm a huge believer in that. I think it's a phenomenal system. I use it all the time. The only time where I think this becomes sort of the gray area is when you merge a meta system into a merchant local system. That leaking out of points may serve that merchant, temporarily, but long term. And I can dive into some of the research S&H green stamps, developed over years, because originally when you collected S&H green stamps, you were not getting anything from that merchant. You were getting something from a third party, a catalog. So you would go and buy your groceries at the grocery store, and you would save up to buy a bicycle for your kid on S&H green stamps. Now that system worked phenomenally well, but there was some major problems that took place as it transitioned into the second phase, and we can cover that. But absolutely, I think, for example, if locally a group of merchants got together, and I encourage anybody out there who's entrepreneurial, because they really can do something phenomenal. If you have a local group of merchants or a regional group of merchants that are similar and complementary, I think there's a phenomenal opportunity. But if a small coffee shop is giving me points and I'm going to go and translate it to Starbucks points, first off, it's hard to sell a smaller merchant on that because he wants to be contradictory to what Starbucks is doing in a lot of ways and contrasting. Now, I could see ways that could work, but it'd be a hard sell for the merchant.
Well, here's what I see. If let's say you're traveling in my part of the world and you do have a Starbucks card, and you're here for consulting assignment, tourist, whatever, and you go to a coffee shop 15 days in a row, as far as I'm concerned, with your definition, your loyalty is on a pause. It's on a pause until you get back stateside. But if you had the ability to, rather than just use your points over there or gather points from that coffee shop and have them accumulated back on Starbucks, wouldn't that be a cool thing? And I think for that small merchant,
interesting.
For that small merchant, I think it's a very it's a gateway to a service where they feel equal because they're connected to the greater ecosystem. Disenfranchised, if he's siloed by himself, if he's disconnected and just offering his own thing, at many a times he's going to have a very hard time getting traction, even with the local clients. The reason I say this is because, guess what? I have to sign up for another card. I have to start accumulating points over here, etc. And then, what if I move town and I go to another town? What happened to my points and all the time I spent there? I do not want that to go to waste. This is why I see the exchange system something that's very central to this all. And it's not just the exchange system, and it includes the social ecosystem like Twitter and Facebook and Foursquare that will probably play a greater part in it.
Faisal, let me season this with a Bitcoin angle. Why even speak of points now? And by the way, you've convinced me. Your use case actually is interesting and has some great legs there. But let's just say instead of converting into points, this collection of consumers that are collecting these rewards is actually a fractionalized Bitcoin or other transactional mechanism. How do you see that playing in? How does that change things?
Well, I think that's a fantastic idea. It's very early, but yeah, because that's a universal currency. the internet currency, the loyalty currency. Who knows? That could be like Dogecoin is the currency for giving,
Yeah.
upvotes. This could be the currency, or someone would get out a currency, a cryptocurrency that would essentially be the currency for loyalty points. So great point.
So if we transition this just as sort of a background theme in a more modern context, if we transfer this into a universal currency, then there are different aspects that are at play here, and the dynamics change. And I'm not really complimenting Starbucks by being in the same ecosystem. We might look at it as it's no different than being in the same ecosystem as the currency that they're using. And that becomes a rather different proposition. The thing is, when you abstract it into just a point, and it doesn't have that much of a connection to what it's really doing. Like within the ecosystem siloed into the walled garden of an individual merchant, that merchant can have power with those points because he can say along the lines of, visit me 10 times, you get a free coffee, or 20% off if this particular behavior takes place, or even more, esoteric type of things like, buy a burger and get the fries free. Channeled into these types of scenarios.
There's so many different offerings. It's so confusing. I could imagine for a merchant to, especially pick and choose their own. I think, when I look at like Starbucks or someone, I think the advantage there is that if you're in a place where you're not familiar with the local merchants, where you might actually find something better than Starbucks, then you're going to choose the brand that you're very familiar with, because you'll take a B experience over the risk of having a D or an F experience. I think that's the Starbucks, that's the obvious advantage in any franchise system. Chipotle is going to be the same no matter what state you're in. And I think loyalty works especially well for those companies, because if they compete directly with, say, Peet's Coffee and Coffee Bean, then if those are all offering very similar experiences, the one that offers you a great loyalty program that you feel a part of, you're going to, I think it's a scale pusher, right? It's a balance pusher to kind of get you over the edge. It's not the reason you go in the store, but if you're 50-50, you're looking at a Coffee Bean and a Starbucks in a state you've never been in, I think there's advantage to choosing the one that you're familiar with. Faisal, you brought up a great point in that internationally it's a different game. And I'd love for you to kind of delve into the first segment of the talk, and being that what makes a loyalty program successful in other parts of the world. And obviously, right, it's a huge world, so everywhere is going to be different. I actually met one guy he was working in Istanbul on a loyalty payments company, and it's such a different approach he's going to take than anywhere else. And, obviously you're going to be limited by the experiences that you have in other countries, but I'd be curious to hear your perspective on at least other parts of the world where you think it would be successful and how you think it would be successful.
Well, internationally, if you look at emerging markets, loyalty is a very geographically concentric, very limited, has a very limited radius in which it operates. So if there's a coffee shop in Dubai, loyalty points are only good in Dubai. They're not good in Kuwait City or anywhere else, or Hong Kong or Singapore. So that's one. Many merchants simply don't offer the loyalty platform, and the reasons are very actually simple and sort of confusing at the same time. They don't know how to get on it. They don't see an easy solution where they can sign up with a loyalty program. So that's one. The second part is the payment instrument used in the premises, if it's a credit card or a debit card or some other, electronic payment mechanism. They don't have a way to integrate that with their POS system and with their loyalty card system, so to accumulate points. So if I'm using a Visa debit in a coffee shop in Singapore, probably is there. But if I'm using it, let's say in New Delhi, probably isn't there, because the credit card company is not providing data to the loyalty program manager, what have you, so that they can tie it up with the loyalty program, the points the person has actually accumulated. So total disconnect over there. Because there is a disconnect, the loyalty programs don't really pick up. I talked about it, I think, in the earlier versions that we had of this podcast, why there are so many Foursquare users who use Foursquare, which is fine. But the option to add a credit card is actually no good because it's only good in the US and a couple of other countries. So if you're here and you're trying to use Foursquare and you become a mayor of a coffee shop or a restaurant, it gives you no benefits because there is no way you can translate those loyalty points onto the check-in. And having said that, even more puzzling and confusing part is that the owner of the establishment really doesn't even know that there is a Foursquare business, their business that is on Foursquare, and that he can actually go and claim that business and then start a loyalty program as it is because it's offered by Foursquare. I surveyed hundreds of famous restaurants and coffee shops and bars, etc. You name it, and everywhere I went and I saw on Foursquare there's a little thing on the right hand side which says, "Is this your business? Claim it here." So that shows that so many burger joints and coffee shops, etc. are people are checking in, people leaving reviews, etc. But that's it. The business owner has no idea that this ecosystem exists. There's no point exchange mechanism between the payment systems and the loyalty program itself. And more importantly, the users are thinking, well, now what? I mean, I'm the mayor, but now what? Nothing more. There is the reward angle is absolutely missing. And I think one of the common denominators is rather than rolling out your own individual loyalty programs, etc., because everyone's using a different POS terminal and everyone has a different sets of problems and so forth, is to look at the social media giants like Facebook, because almost everyone has a Facebook page, everyone has a Facebook on the mobile. Same thing with Foursquare. So I think if somehow we could tie these up with the credit card companies and the payment companies or the banks or what have you, and get the data that is very much needed to tie the merchant and their customer, I think we may have something. But loyalty programs are struggling. They have a very hard time trying to convince clients to sign up for it because it's just another card that they have to add in. And if you look at the mobile space or the smartphone space, the traction is very, very low for the same reason that, what am I going to get out of it? Just check-in points and become a mayor, nothing more.
Faisal, how popular are payment cards that have loyalty programs attached to them in that region of the world?
Popular in the sense that only the major schemes, Visa, MasterCard, etc., have it. But then their loyalty programs are restricted to their closed-loop system. So, if you have 20,000 points, you can buy a toaster or a juicer or what have you, but that's only from them, but nothing from the outside world. You cannot take your Visa points or your Lufthansa points and say, well, I want to go check in at the Hyatt. Well, actually, you can do that, but that's a bad example. But let's say you can't take your Visa points or your Marriott points and go into a coffee shop and say, hey, guess what? 500 points gets me a free coffee over here. You can't do that. They're not interchangeable. So very restricted, very, very segmented, small communities of loyalty points and systems, but not talking to each other.
Interesting. Faisal, do you see any sort of cultural impact? Countries that have either been through recent wars or been through any food crises or what other factors may contribute to them adopting early? I know obviously Silicon Valley is going to adopt any technology earlier, so there's a bias there. But even across the United States, you see both coasts, I'm sure pick up technology before really the middle of the country just because of the more affluent population will live there. Is there any sort of interesting cultural impact that comes to mind, when a company startup decides what country to go into?
I really can't answer that, but I'll tell you. I mean, if you look at India by itself, 600 million users with smartphones, or is it 300 million? I forgot the number, but it's pretty big though.
Wow.
And even with that, you have to understand, 80 or 90% of the market just is not interested in loyalty. The only affluent users might be, and here's the problem with me: if there's a person that is offering, or a startup that comes up in Pakistan and says, listen, I made this great app and it'll get you points, I've signed up 1,500 merchants on it, I don't want to accept it. I just feel the trust factor is not there. They really have to convince me, get the right marker placeholders in play and get my friends on it before I will accept it. But if Foursquare, for example, comes to Pakistan, no questions asked, I'll accept it and I'll start using it. But I've seen that startups, regional startups or domesticated startups have a very hard time trying to get traction for loyalty points and loyalty customers. The merchant sell side is simple. I mean, they sell, you say you don't pay anything, we'll handle everything, we'll take a cut out of whatever it is, etc. But the sad reality is that A, it's not connected to any payment system, and B, the numbers just aren't there.
Yeah, it's like you really need three pillars, right? You need the loyalty program itself, whatever that looks like, whether it's points or rewards. You need the payment infrastructure, right? Like ideally, you have this one app be the method that you pay with, and then you also have the geolocation feature or some sort of gamification layer on top of it. I think Foursquare is what you're alluding to, that they've solved two of those problems, or at least strongly one of them. And what the opportunity would be to sprinkle on a layer of payments, and then you have the trust there that's already in place from all these people using the app for years. It's interesting. I think companies that come at it from the other direction just try to build a loyalty program, they keep falling on their faces because there's not really another value proposition on top of it that makes it, really interesting to use.
Well, if you look at Foursquare, and I've sent them some emails and I got some, cursory replies back. But Foursquare does not provide an API layer for a third party to come in. For example, if my company in Pakistan has access to obfuscated credit card data, and I want to somehow build an app and provide that information into the Foursquare layer, and so that people can associate their credit cards, etc. But I don't want to do this on a voluntarily basis. I want to do this as a business case. Foursquare just doesn't give that option right now. That may change. And having said that, the most part of South Asia, the most part of Southeast Asia, the GCC complete, and North Africa is absolutely missing on this layer. So there are no Yardleys or what have you, or people who are providing credit card data into such apps so that the disconnect can be bridged.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to introduce something that unfortunately, again, there's a historical precedence on this, and it's contradictory and contrarian to what us technologists think about. And this is going to be a theme, but let's go back Sperry Hutchinson, S&H green stamps. It's a turn of the century. Collecting S&H green stamps points has a mechanical load and a cognitive load at the same time. It didn't happen automatically. The very first stamps had a cognitive and mechanical load for the operator, the merchant, the disinterested, employee had to rip these stamps from these booklets and hand them to people. And different types of purchases, different classes of purchases created different types of stamps. The consumer had to take these stamps, cut them up, and put them into essentially flimsy bingo booklets, if you will. And each page was worth X number of dollars. And there was even a sort of a turbocharged center point that you could put in later versions that doubled the value on a page. Those were like finding unicorns. They would come out randomly. So there was a gamification in this system. Now, along all this, S&H was one of the most scientific organizations that I've come across, other than Bell Laboratories and Western Electric, in researching their consumers even after something's successful. They consistently, for almost 100 years, more or less, looked at this and said, what does it mean? How do people react to different things? So we have cognitive load, we have mechanical load in all of this stuff. So why did people go out of their way to collect these things? So here we are talking about technology, and we want to make this as easy as possible. What does the research say? What is the fundamental issue that allowed people to want to take their time and to get involved in this? It is very complex to speak in a conversation like this, but it boils down to the fact that once something is so appealing. It takes on a life of its own. And when S&H got to that tipping point, which is really the 1920s, even though they started in the early 1900s, you would go and put fuel in your car in the 1920s. At that point, it was an automatic device that was spitting these stamps out. And there you got a roll of stamps. There was a really interesting interplay. There's some very early film from that era that I have in the library I have that shows how people were reacting to getting this, sometimes for the first time. Because as it was moving to different service stations and around the country, people were like, what is this? And you could see the engagement that took place. So there are elements that, again, human beings have not changed psychologically and emotionally for thousands of years, perhaps hundreds and thousands of years. So this research is still very valid. And so this is something I think is important. And then there's the other element to this. And again, it's psychological on both sides, is breakage. The notion that you're accumulating all these things, you're getting as a merchant, you're getting all the benefits of getting people involved in these programs, but the individual never uses them. Now, there's a whole science of breakage, which essentially says, that's a good thing, and then it's a bad thing. It's according to how the breakage affects the system as a whole. So if you look at this from a systems theory standpoint, breakage could make or break a loyalty system. We can slightly digress into coupons, because couponing is a form of loyalty. And if you look in the United States in the Sunday paper, there's a whole lot of trees that have got to be cut down to insert these coupons into the paper, and the return rate to the manufacturer is in the less than single digit, single digits. But it still works. And if you were to go to Procter & Gamble and said, I'm going to eliminate your Sunday inserts and your freestanding inserts that come in the mail, they would say you would essentially put us out of business. So here is a broken clock that's right twice a day, 12 midnight and 12 noon. It is obviously broken. It is actually almost single-handedly sustaining a vast majority of second-tier newspapers, because the distribution of these freestanding inserts are a massive amount of money for the papers and some of the other forms of advertising that are related. So there's breakage. So what happens in the breakage? Well, I can tell you in coupons, people cut it out of the paper. And primarily these in the United States are going to be the people who do the vast majority of purchasing for a home. And that's going to be primarily a female between the ages of 25 and 45.
Demographics
so
are
they
huge.
cut these. It is very huge. So the intention is, I cut this advertisement out of the paper that we call a coupon. And this mini billboard of an advertisement might get stuck to a refrigerator. The best intention is to have that advertisement in your hands when you go to the grocery store. Here's the psychology on loyalty. This is, again, loyalty. You have this form of advertisement telling you to buy this form of bathroom tissue, this brand, this marketing, this color. Color schemes are extremely important. They're the reading system on a lot of these smaller format advertising. And so they go into the grocery store and they say, that's the brand. Did that loyalty program work? Absolutely. It worked in a manner that most of us, it's ephemeral. It's in a manner that most of us don't recognize.
I think
so there's a lot more to this than you can recognize.
Yeah, and I think you said it right on the head, though, with demographic, right? I think we can all agree that the gamification and loyalty programs are useful and they're effective. But I think, the actual practice of how do you put them out into the world? What do they look like? How are they sticky? How are they not just a one-time fad? And I think, you look at something like, when you board a plane, you can use your phone, the QR code on your phone or the barcode on your phone to scan the ticket. And, not everyone's going to do that. There's going to be a certain demographic of people, and you could almost clearly see the demographic of people who do use these. And then there's going to be the same application in parallel to payments, or not payments per se, but the loyalty programs with coupons, right? My mom's going to cut out coupons for the rest of her life, but I'll never cut out coupons, and I'll always look to some sort of mobile tech product to use. And I think that's just a natural transition there.
But Mike, it's actually more complex. It's actually more complex than that. Here's the fundamental problem with wallets, with payments in a lot of different scenarios, and almost all loyalty and couponing systems. Most of these systems are designed by males between the ages of 25 and 45, and a vast majority of them have never touched a coupon in their life, and they do not participate in the buying of the vast majority of the wealth a family creates during the week for groceries and other family goods. So there's this rather large disconnect. And I have spent an inordinately large amount of time over the last 30 years sitting down, primarily early, a lot of very gray-haired individuals who were wanting to, in fact, create couponing systems, and they've never used coupons themselves. So it's very hard to have a rational dialogue, under these circumstances. Flash forward to today, I sit down with an inordinately large number of startups that either tangentially want to move into loyalty, payment startups, or want to make that a centerpiece. And these are people usually in the ages of between 18 and 29. And they have never used a coupon or really a loyalty card in a lot of scenarios. So again, there's this disconnect of communication. And then there's a complete void of the psychology that's involved. We just talked about the mini billboard. Now, if you're inside of Procter & Gamble, and you're not going to get this on level one, deep inside the bowels of this company, they know how effective that advertising mechanism called a coupon is. And they know that if you create a point system, in fact, if you look on a lot of Procter & Gamble products, there's a little cutout, little dotted line. It's a rectangle, and it's a point system. And it's actually a very complex point system that allows generally educational facilities, private and public education facilities, to have consumers collect these things. This might sound a lot like S&H green stamps, because it is. They collect these points, and they put them together in drives, and they bring them to the school, and the school can convert that into money being donated. If it's a public entity in the proper way, to that particular school district or that particular school. Yeah. And it is phenomenally a valid system, and it's just growing incredibly. But you and I may not know about that. If you're in a family, your kids and your wife might know about it, and they might only know about it for a period of time when it makes sense for them. But these layers of loyalty systems are out there.
True.
They are organically grown, and we can learn so much from them.
True. But I wouldn't assume that just because you don't use it for, X number of years that you wouldn't know how it works or wouldn't be able to figure it out. I have cut out maybe 10
that's
coupons.
Not what I'm not asserting that. What I'm asserting is that I'm always, it's my common theme here, is that if you're going to use technology to solve a problem, either learn about it yourself, empirically, go out in the field, really deal with the people that are doing these things before you build these beautifully, perfectly,
fully agreed,
technically correct products. And if you don't have that desire, find people who have that information and respect it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when this information is first introduced to a technologist, if they're really open and aware of the world, their mind should be blown, because all of a sudden they're looking at the world in a radically different way. I deal with a lot of founders.
Yeah,
they don't want to be blown away. They look at it and say, oh, I just built this entire cathedral to technology, and it has a radical disconnect from reality. What do I do now?
Nothing more wasteful in the world than building things that customers don't want, or, don't have a place in the world. And it's unfortunately the biggest cause of waste in technology.
This is the challenge of the Silicon Valley and startup community today, is that tremendous amount of energy.
Let me ask you a question. You have to understand Gen Generation Y and Generation X, what have you, are coming onto the mobile phones. That's what they use. They're not going to be cutting coupons, on paper, etc. And if not now, maybe 5, 6, 7 years or 10 years down the line, you will see a vast majority of people using digital coupons or what have you for
Sure.
loyalty, etc.
No doubt.
So,
No doubt.
so keeping that in mind, then what is a successful distribution strategy across the U.S.? Resellers, bank partnerships, direct sales. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's my view. My view is absolutely you're going to see generational transitions. That's life. That's what's going to happen. The paper coupon is never going to go away. The paper punch card is never going to go away. Heartbreaking to me. I watched a pretty good sized independent coffee house in Los Angeles move away from their iPad cash register and their loyalty program, and it went back to an old-fashioned cash register and a punch card. And the punch card they taped to the front of the cash register, and they not only doubled sales, they with the use of the punch card, they created almost a viral activity on Twitter over the card because they kind of put funny sayings on it. It's all kind of quirky. There's ways to really utilize these different things. Now, could you have done that within technology? Yes. Word to technologist. Make flexible tools. Yeah. All right? If you're going to create a punch card, your view of a punch card is your view of a punch card. Okay? If you've had enough experience in the world, all right, you go out there and you say, wow, there's about 1,000 different varieties. I'm not going to build that. That's right. Don't. Make it flexible enough for the merchant to decide. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
So now, will somebody who is 19 use a coupon who's male? No, he wouldn't have done it in the 1950s either. But it's still very likely that if he winds up getting married and having a standard nuclear family, there's a good chance his girlfriend turning into a wife has already used some kind of form of couponing and is already kind of down that road. And again, it's not 50% of the population. It's about 90% of the financial productivity of a family. You got to understand that ratio. Yep. So now how do we take what we know works, couponing, even though it's broken, massively broken, from a fundamental level maybe, how do we take that and move it into the digital age? Well, that's the answer of the century, because if you build the right systems, and it's not a system, it's not one company, you will be able to be very transformative.
I want to cover that. I think that's super important. I think there's two focuses that will be really important for a lot of startup founders out there to hear about, myself included. If I heard this talk 2 years ago, it would have changed my perception on how we grow the business. And I think the question
about that.
The question that, and it wouldn't necessarily have changed anything. It just give you a different perception on what the world is around you. And I think the big question that all VCs, all investors are going to ask the founders is, how do you get it out into the world? And I think depending on what it is, whether it's a point of sale system, whether it's a loyalty platform that integrates to a point of sale system, whether it's a side by payment, essentially gateway, something like Level Up or QuaPay, how do you get it out there? And I think there's different approaches and different tools you can use. But I think a lot of founders are kind of in the stage where they have the idea, they understand the product, they're trying to build a flexible product, but then they're faced with this massive challenge that usually incumbents are the ones who are able to solve this much better. Is how do you get it out there? Do you use resellers? Do you go direct with a sales force, offering some incentive program? Do you use banks? GoPago, partner with Chase Payment Tech, recently acquired by Amazon. What are the successful ways that you guys look at getting out into the world?
Well, I'll tell you, United States, it's going to be very simple, and it's going to be non-technological. The only way you can introduce a new business product or service to a merchant is with a human being. That's it.
Can it be that great, right? Like if Square argues it's our product is that good, merchants will tell other merchants, we'll put it on large scale advertising, and then they'll adopt it.
Well, The final analysis is not in on that, and that'd be another entire discussion. And I've tracked that very, very closely. I've tracked the chief financial officer of that company making a claim that no salesperson is going to be necessary until the very last minute. I will tell you that the early results that I can say right now is as a very immature statement to be made. Very immature. We'll leave that aside. Merchants are concerned with their own business. I'm not talking about the top 1% of the merchants that are generating about 50% of the volume. I'm not talking about Nordstrom's and Macy's and et cetera. I'm talking about the 99% of the merchants that are generating about 60% of the debit volume and about 30 to 80%, however you want to look at it, of the credit card volume. These merchants have a bandwidth issue. They are being inundated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with the inventions, schemes, and ideas of us technologists. It does not stop. The next Foursquare is on the phone calling this guy up day and night, telling him about how their program is going to be better. And if you were to sit in, and I do this, I spend a lot of time every year over the last 30 years, I give up between 3 to 6 weeks where I work for no cost at various merchants, and I'm a fly on the wall. I do it because I absolutely love it. I can't stop doing this. And some of them pay me, but it usually goes to their charity or a charity of my choice. But you sit there and you listen to that phone ring and you listen to the pitch, and then you see the guy who has the pitch book walking into the front door. Now, you might argue with me and say, well, that's somebody going out there and pitching a product, and yet they still get rejected. Absolutely, and they should. Okay, but that's no different from getting a banner click through or the guy down the street that says, I just got this great new thing and it's working for me. Yes, in most contexts, viral word of mouth works phenomenally well. I will argue, and we'll see this historically, that viral word of mouth in a business to business product context only can reach to an nth degree level, and that nth degree is debatable. I will argue that in the final analysis, it'll come to the 25 percentile maximum. And if you base your entire business plan on viral, and you've insulted the entire sales community in the process because you said that selling is, invalid form of distribution and business to business, you may have problems transitioning to the level where the product should really be. And we're seeing that in a lot of products and a lot of business. And I'm not talking about consumer products. I'm not talking about somebody coming knocking on your front door, selling you encyclopedias or an encyclopedia app. I'm speaking of the product itself. And even if the product is 100% digital, you don't touch it or feel it. That merchant needs to be communicated with at his time, at his place, and within a language he understands. And guess what? But the dry cleaner down the street doesn't necessarily speak in the same language as the cafe owner. So this premise that the dry cleaner can translate this, or you let some student do it because he's got a really cool, iPhone, vibe going, and he says, look at this. This is great. That's maybe 5 percentile. The enacted customer is a ridiculous way to market for business products. Consumer products, different. Consumer to consumer, different program. So how do you get merchants?
Though? I mean, could you? I agree with you on your statement going direct, but I think it'd be really interesting to say, do you work with food resellers, point of sale resellers, ISOs, independent sales organizations for banks, or?
Well, it really comes down. This is really actually far more complex than I could possibly explain in this setting, because there's a lot to this, and it's a science upon itself. This is a real science. You can break it down really objectively and look at it. Now, you have to look at the product. You have to really look at what problem it's solving. And this is a cathartic experience for the designer, because once you start breaking it down from the sales proposition, the product is going to change. Absolutely. So when companies, especially startups, are producing a product in a vacuum, or the echo chamber of technology alone, you are going to create a monster very few people are going to understand or want. The most successful sales companies that sold business to business were IBM and Xerox. And if you were to go to a Xerox engineer and say, back in its era when Xerox was controlling the world, they failed for a lot of other reasons, but it wasn't because of their salespeople. If you were to go to an engineer at Xerox in the 1970s and say, what is your most valuable tool? My buddy, who's a sales guy, he comes in and he feeds back what I did wrong. Now, you want to know how technology companies are doing that today? We throw it all out there and we'll see what sticks. And you want to know what you've done? Is you've created a cognitive load on your marketplace who will probably edit your product out from their vision in the future. It is ridiculousness. And that is the R&D that's taking place right now.
So it's ridiculous. I guess what you're saying is no matter how good the startups may be, the salesperson is obviously very important. It's going to be a localized effort because you can't be selling all across the U.S. You'll probably have to be, concentrating on a certain cities, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, etc. And adoption is going to be a big thing because, I go through the angel list of all the startups that are doing loyalty programs and, as fine and dandy as they may be, my question is, who's going to use them? Is the merchant really is really going to adopt them? And what's the strategy for adoption? And I think you talked about that right now.
It's not chicken or egg, too. A lot of people think this is a chicken or egg. The easy, low-hanging fruit on the tree is I'll seed the world with more consumers and merchants, and the merchants will feel social pressure. That is infantile.
So who will win?
Well, I tell you. Well, let's take a step back. First off, and Faisal, you're right on target about how this is a complexity. But I'll add one more layer, and this is where a lot of technologists start crying. It's not just that. Yes, it is local and understanding the local market, but it's also understanding the sectors of industry that you need to work in. And everybody goes after the food establishments. It's these poor restaurateurs, man. They are the guinea pigs of everybody's schemes and marketing ideas and fantasies and great ideas, right? And you go, let's just find the corner bar, let's find the corner cafe, and we'll do something on loyalty. And this poor soul has got to wake up to 20 or 30 of these a week. These calls don't stop. Every time somebody's got a great idea, they make these calls. And when you're sitting there like I have been doing for many years, and you hear these pitches and you watch people come in with the best of intentions, and they start it backwards. Word of advice, if you are going to make a startup that's selling anything to a business, and you don't start that startup with a chief salesperson, you've already injured yourself to the 50 percentile.
So
that
Brian,
is a fact, and you will never change it.
If you're in a startup now and you've got this great magical, this great product that is in the loyalty arena, and you want to get it out into the world, I think of every product is in one or two categories in relation to the merchants. One that every merchant has to use. So this would be something like a telephone or a point of sale system.
Sure.
And say of course there's many different types of point of sale systems. But if you have a point of sale system in your store, there's no salesperson in the world that could come in with the exact same system and make you pull out what you already have and give you something that does the same functionality, right? If it's better enough, you can certainly make that sell. It's very, very difficult, as opposed to when you first open your store or ownership is changing. There's some sort of catalyst for change, and then you go out and you look for this system because you need it. As opposed to what a lot of loyalty falls in the second category, which this is something that any merchant can be sold to at any time, right? It adds on, it sort of sits on the side of their main business, and if it's useful, right, then it's worth, all it is dollars in and dollars out. So if they make more money and they feel they have greater value from what they're paying for it, right, you'll keep it. And I think a lot of companies like Belly, 5-Star, Mogul's another one, MOGL, they have a lot of merchants out there because they were offering this second sort of offering where it's take this loyalty platform, take this tool, this iPad, this stand, this scanner, whatever it is, put it beside your point of sale terminal and keep it for 3 months, right? It's only $25 a month, $50 a month, whatever the cost is, make it very nominal and offer an easy sell, get a lot of those tools out there, raise money, and who knows sort of what the long-term outcome is. But I think that's where some significant percentage of startups are now. Is Level Up doing great? Level Up goes sort of, they hire salespeople in a city, they get a ton of sales, and they sort of made a massive layoff with the salespeople once you have that existing customer base. But then it goes to the second question.
That was a mistake.
Yeah, and it's like, depending on the sort of distribution channel you take, whether you hire a bunch of local salespeople, whether you bring in your own, whether you work with college kids, whether you use resellers, whether you sort of, try and get, viral coefficient with strictly word of mouth, whatever it may be, you eventually get to a point where you realize the successful outcome of these sort of battling startups is going to be who offers the better product. And I think a lot of the better product is the experience, and the experience sits on top of the technology. So I'd love to at least hear your maybe Faisal, your perspective first on what is the successful technology play that allows for a successful loyalty payment or loyalty platform to sit on top of that.
Well, in my part of the world, it's pretty simple. The system is broken. Just getting that bridge between the merchant, the payment system, and the user connected is a win by itself. It's not going to happen immediately. There are laws, just like the U.S., we have loyalty laws, federally regulated laws that prevent loyalty cards, from being an open loop system rather than a closed loop system. But from a technical strategy point of view, definitely, if somehow you can go across the the POS deployments that you have, somehow be able to integrate those with the payment systems and integrate those with the loyalty apps that are out there. And there are not that many out there, but, at least the major ones, like I mentioned, Foursquare is a starter. And I think somewhere down the line, you'll see integration with, the large processing engines for loyalty trades like IMEA or Loyalty One. They are huge in this space. You could take Starbucks points and translate them to JAL or Singapore Airline points and so forth. They actually maintain all these exchanges. These companies have yet to enter the emerging markets. It's not that they've not been looking at it. I've consulted with a few that have, done some basic research. So I think when we look at the merchant, they would have some loyalty app. That app would be connected to the payment system, and that payment system would be connected to perhaps, a trading engine like EMEA or Loyalty One. I think that would complete the loop. And until that doesn't happen, we won't see much traction in loyalty, at least in this part of the world.
Fundamentally, when we look at loyalty, and you look at building these products, and you're a startup, right? As I mentioned before, if you don't have a seeing eye dog who already knows the lay of the land, what you're essentially doing is reinventing the wheel. You're wasting a tremendous amount of resources, time, energy, money. And sure, some startups have venture capitalists that are more than willing to throw money into a very high-profile startup and do this market research ex post facto. Sure, you can go out there, throw everything out there and say, what's working? Okay, that's not working. And then we'll edit. Or you can hire somebody or take your own staff who's not trained in empirical research, may have taken a college course, may have been a computer scientist. Great. I love technology. I'm a computer scientist also. But if you're not trained in real empirical study, you go out there and you see what you want to see. You ask questions of the merchant that are similar to this. Henry Ford asking the Pony Express, what do you need?
Yeah.
What do you need? I need faster horses.
Brian,
right? So you're going to get the feedback that you're looking for instead of really seeing what works. So now you start building these systems with the correct feedback loop. Any technologist understands feedback loop. The feedback loop needs to be there first before the product exists. The feedback loop informs the product. You create the product. Now you start really taking off. And that's when all the spicing that us technologists can create starts becoming meaningful.
But
you have to pick your market.
What details, though? I think it'd be really interesting, at least if I was listening, to know even just a few examples of what we're talking about. And this would be something like, do you build a little plastic device that sits next to the computer in the store, in the coffee shop, in the dry cleaners, whatever it is, that you use your phone to open up the app and pay? Right? That's one option. Do you use, and that is a separate gateway that goes directly to the merchant's bank. The money sits in a separate bank or connects to their existing payment channels. Or do you integrate right into their current payment system? So something like mobile would actually intercept the credit card data and know that it was you who made that transaction. Right? Groupon Payments offers a similar sort of offering. Or do you go like 5-Star? And 5-Star has a technology integration that allows you to use your card or the barcode scanner on your phone to scan when you walk in. Or Square, which claims to work on geolocation. I mean, there's a lot of different specific technical approaches. I think that would be really interesting. A lot of founders kind of, and I know obviously the research needs to be there and you have to talk to the customer. But as far as those, do any stand out as ones that definitely won't work or definitely will work?
Well, Mike, all and none at the same time. All right. Again, it's really up to what you're trying to achieve. First off,
sure.
Are you trying to send new customers to the business? Groupon, trying to send new customers externally to that business, or are you trying to enhance the customers the business already has? Don't try to solve both problems at the same time initially.
So say
secondarily,
you're doing one.
You can't.
So
well, I would say the way you start is get out of the mentality you're going to be able to effectively send customers to the business, because some of the best companies in the world, the most financially stable companies in the world, let's maybe say Google, is having a very hard time doing that. And I can tell you 1,000 reasons, literally, why. And again, they're approaching it like a technology company, as they well should, because it worked. It worked for all the other markets that they tried to go after. You ask Google where they failed, and it's not coincidence that they failed in effectively sending people to businesses in the retail space from a loyalty standpoint, all right? And they effectively failed in payments, all right? So you got two things that every technologist says, I want to get into, that's, really want to, move into this market, I want to get into, but I'm going to approach it just like the last guy did. And I'm just going to build it and then they'll come. All right. So are you sending new customers out there? I would say you could do that, but you better look at that market from the standpoint of how couponing works and how those mechanisms have worked over the decades and maybe 100 years. Or are you trying to enhance the existing customer base and let that existing customer base become more viral? I say that that's the mountain that a startup should try to be climbing, because it's the easiest, lowest hanging fruit on the tree. Now, how you achieve that? First off, tell me the market you want to focus in, because if you say all merchants, then you already failed, because there's no such thing as all merchants. All right. You only see the world through those eyes if you've never been down low enough to this ground level. There are segmentations of merchants that are materially different. And as a technologist, you might say, well, that's not material enough. Well, for them, it is. And if you don't speak in their language and you don't communicate and translate and are flexible enough in their environment, you've wasted their time and your time. So the typical low-hanging fruit is, of course, always going to be food and beverage. I would say that's probably the last place you really want to start going after, but you could.
They're the easiest to walk in. There's a lot of them.
Well, yeah, but then again, it's the hardest to get any get through the noise.
Sure.
Here's what I tell anybody is take off the blinders, spend 3 hours. If you want to just do some research, my gosh, a lot of people won't do this. Spend 3 hours and be the owner for those 3 hours. See what they have to deal with. Yeah. Listen to the phone calls they get.
And you could see big companies taking their time too. I mean, Apple is going to take their time and research it and make a great play. Whereas,
well, that was going to be my other point. My other point is, no matter how big you think you are, no matter how well-funded you are, no matter how big you think your IPO is going to be, and how profile your founder is, you will not compete with Apple and you will not compete with Google on their turf. Why? Because Apple owns the hardware. I'm not talking about just who they are. I'm talking about their turf. They own the hardware and they own the software. I sat down with a founder of a payment startup And I was laughed at when I said that Apple would be involved in payments. I said, they own the hardware and software. You're going to compete with them on their own turf? It's not going to happen. All right. And we're going to see it happen. As historians, we're going to see this destroy some companies because of that really bad mistake. Google owns, in some respect, the Android component of this. And Google will activate as soon as they see what Apple's doing. They don't really understand exactly what Apple's doing. And a lot of people don't understand it because there's so many, trails that people are going down. We didn't mention it all in all this. And I will drop in the technology. You wanted the technology solution? I'll give you the universal technology solution that I would bet on, iBeacons. And not iBeacons as we currently understand it as this limited BLE, Bluetooth Low Energy type of system. The conceptual idea of iBeacons, the idea that you are not really notifying the merchant, but you've given the merchant permission to let them know that you're there. Now, we have the platform. And let me tell you, 3 years from now, this will be an academic conversation. All of the other mechanisms we've talked about will become irrelevant.
Interesting.
So if you were a startup founder, and you were talking to me in 2010, I would have been talking to you about iBeacon. You want to know why? Because I've been forensically studying patents since I was a teenager. And I specifically get a lot of enjoyment studying Apple patents. And a lot of people say, well, that's just esoteric. They may not apply that. Well, how many times does Apple need to put a patent for Bluetooth and near field communication before you realize that they're spending a whole lot of man years on developing technology? Do you need 30 patents? Well, let's talk about 260 patents that are related to Bluetooth and near field. Is Apple going to get involved in that market? Well, if you were a startup founder talking to Brian Roemmele in 2010 and you ignored the fact that Apple is going to create a communication mechanism that is highly local, that's going to be using, well, certainly Bluetooth, certainly Wi-Fi. Whenever we get this NFC, I just answered a Quora question this morning. This debate between NFC and Bluetooth, ridiculous debate. Apple's already beyond that. Look at their latest patent. Their patent is about Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and NFC, and they already exposed how they were going to set up the transaction. So, that debate's is not even academic to Apple. They're way beyond it. Meanwhile, us technologists, we're in the field as barking dogs saying NFC, Bluetooth, and near EMV. Okay, so now we have iBeacon. Why is that important? Because Apple is a tastemaker. They are creating they're creating the landscape as we speak. What do iBeacons do? Well, what can't they do? They can do everything. And those iBeacons are going to be Bluetooth. They're going to use Wi-Fi. They're going to use cellular. They're going to use NFC. They're going to use magnetics, right? They're going to use sonics, and they're going to use optics. We're going to be using all the possible sensors that one could imagine within this construction that Apple's building. It actually creates unlimited amount of opportunity.
That is true.
Because once you know what the lay of the land is going to be, and you get out of this debate of whether my unique thing, you don't have the ability to set up that unique thing if you're using somebody else's real estate, right? I have all these people who are technologists, they're brilliant individuals, and they're telling me that I'm going to build this on Apple's land. And I go, interesting. They're your landlord, by the way.
Yep. I mean,
when you anytime.
Once you own the phone, you have such power.
That's right. So now let's look at Android really quick too. I would say, because everybody says, okay, that works for Apple. Android is so fragmented. That's right. Android is so fragmented. Take a guess on what version of somebody's Android phone is on. We don't know. It might support this. That's a big problem for Google. I don't know how they're going to solve it. But I know how they're going to solve it ultimately. Google is going to create the reference platform. They're going to, in some way, have to dominate this. And I believe the inception point is going to be payments. I think what's going to happen is once Apple completely blows away even the most knowledgeable individual on Apple technology, when they blow away the market, Google's going to come back and say, holy cow, we need to take hold of this because we can't we can't start pumping new Android builds that we know the existing infrastructure can't support. Apple created something called the Secure Enclave. Well, they didn't really create it. It was part of the A7 technology that ARM created. I knew about this secured part of the A7 years ago because it was part of the reference library. And again, I had these debates with people saying, Apple's not moving in that direction.
Brian,
I go, well, they're moving towards the A7 chip. The A7 chip has this already.
A lot of the patents that you put out, I think, are just really enlightful for people to look into the details. Especially you can, gain it for large companies. And you get a lot of insight into what they're
small
going to do.
Companies too.
Small companies too. I think not a lot of people do that, and it's just such a big insight.
Let me tell you, there are a dozen small companies right now that have already, jumped this chasm. They stopped doing this. I'm going to build it. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to deploy. They're actually taking some of this advice. They've been speaking to me. And they said, listen, let's look at it. What will the landscape look like when iBeacons are out there? What will it look like if Apple iWallet's out there? And what are the opportunities?
You've got to plan for where the puck is going to be.
Because they're the landlord. And if you want to create a new space, create your own operating system, your own hardware platform, and compete with them, and then you get the rights to control the entire infrastructure.
Bam, you heard it here.
And this is true for anybody.
Yeah.
This is true for anybody that's building on Apple.
That's super. That's great information, Brian.
Gentlemen, that was a very illuminating conversation on loyalty, I must say.
All right, guys, this was great.
It definitely was.
We definitely covered international. We covered strategy on distribution and the technical strategy. So this is a great one, guys.
We'll speak next week then. Take care.
Good.
Beautiful. You guys take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
We'll talk to you soon.